Well, for the third week in a row, we have some really challenging words from the Lord Jesus. And next week, we will have a break in those challenging words. We'll hear about the return of the prodigal son. But this week, we are told that we should hate our father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even our own life. And the word there that St. Luke used does indeed mean hate. But in the context of the first century where Jesus lived, when he said that, what he meant was to love less. So everyone should be loved. Obviously, that's one of the commandments of Christ, but they should be loved after Jesus. He should have first place in our life. We cannot prefer anyone or anything to Jesus. He must have priority over even the closest relationships in our life. Because if there are people who can take us away from him or who can lead us to disobey the teachings of Christ, then they have too much power in our lives. And lest we think that it's only other people, Jesus tells us that we should also love our own life less than we love him. And he gave us this great example because he preferred our salvation to his own life. And so we ought to as well. There is a great story about St. Thomas Aquinas that kind of illustrates this challenge between loving our family and loving Jesus Christ. St. Thomas decided at one point when he was a young man that he wanted to enter the Dominican order, but his family did not want him to. His dad was already deceased, and his mother and his siblings, his brothers and sisters, were set against this. They wanted him to take a different path. They wanted him to become the abbot or the leader of this important monastery, and they hoped that one day he might become the pope. But St. Thomas wanted to join this group of poor friars, and so his family decided to do something about it. They took him and they locked him in a room in their house, and they decided, well, maybe if we keep him here, he'll change his mind. Well, he didn't, and so they decided, well, let's send in his younger sister. Maybe he'll listen to her. And of course, he did not do that. And then they decided, well, let's send in an attractive young lady, and maybe he will listen to her. And so they sent her in, and St. Thomas took from the fireplace a burning log, and he chased that woman out of the room. And at that point, they knew this guy's serious about his plans. And so they relented, and St. Thomas became a Dominican. They came around to his choice, and let's see what happened. You know, he has become one of the greatest saints in the church. We have his image on our stained glass window over here. And St. Thomas shows us that family ties are important, but they are not absolute. The first vocation of the Christian is to. So today I want to give some examples of things that might come up in our modern context of issues that where we have to choose between loving our family or our friends or our employers over loving Christ. And I don't exempt myself from this because I too live in the world with its complexities and its difficulties, and I am a man of weakness and don't always make the right decisions. But what I'm trying to say here is that I'm not suggesting that if this happens, do this, because every situation is totally unique. What I'm suggesting is that we follow the instruction of Jesus in our gospel, that we sit down and calculate the cost, that we use the prudence in our minds that God has given to us and pray. But above all, remember, we have an obligation to Christ. We have a commitment to the Lord, and we have to consider that as well. So here are some examples in no particular order. Maybe a young man or a young woman who wants to pursue the priesthood or religious life, and their family disapproves. I know of situations that this has happened. So what are they to do? Or how about the opposite? A parent whose son or daughter wants to pursue religious life or the priesthood, and they were hoping for something else from their life. Or maybe somebody wants to become Catholic, wants to join the church, but is afraid of how their family might respond or their coworkers. Maybe someone wants to go to Mass more frequently, daily, weekly, and they're afraid of what are my roommates going to think, or what will my family say if I do that? Or somebody in the family wants to start praying more, and they think, well, how will my spouse respond, or the children? What will that be like? Or how about this particularly difficult one? A person is invited to a wedding, and they think to themselves, maybe this is one that I should not go to. Maybe it's a second marriage or outside the church, and you think, what are the consequences of me going, or what are the consequences of me not going? Or a person is at work and asked to comply with an order that is against their conscience, and they're afraid, what are the consequences if I don't obey? And then we could go on and on and on and on, because these things happen all the time in our lives, unfortunately. But what we need to do, again, is sit down, calculate the cost, use our prudence, and pray. And remember, above all, we have an obligation to follow Jesus. We have a commitment to the Lord above all other relationships in our life. No one is more demanding than Jesus, but at the same time, no one is more merciful, because he loves us so very much. And he has said again and again, and we'll hear it next week in that story about the prodigal son, those who are the farthest off are the best welcomed in his sacred heart. And he wants our perfection, but he also knows our human frailty. And so he is very compassionate towards us. But he knows that he teaches us that we ought to follow him with our whole heart, preferring him above all things, all of our relationships, even our own life. And if we do that, then we will truly be his disciples. It's not easy. It never has been easy from the very beginning. It's still not easy today, but that is the way that the Lord has set out for us, and we would do well to follow it.